This episode, we'll take a very quick look at the events following the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which occurred in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. King, the night before his passing, gives his very final speech. You can watch it online, called The Mountaintop, where the biblical story of Moses prophesying and seeing his people, the Israelites, going into the promised land, but he himself does not. Dr. King gives this very similar metaphor and allegory where he is, in a sense, like Moses, and he can see the promised land, but he may not make it there with the people. He is going to be assassinated the next day on the balcony of his hotel room by James Earl Ray. We had Lee Harvey Oswald killed John F. Kennedy in 1963. Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965. And now in 1968 is the passing of Dr. King. The hotel where he was killed is a civil rights museum today, with the room left the way it was that day. He would be buried in Atlanta, Georgia. One of the local teenagers who was in attendance would become a Jedi Knight years later, Samuel L. Jackson. And Dr. King and his wife, Coretta, are buried there in Atlanta today at a memorial site. A month later, Robert Kennedy, the younger brother of John F. Kennedy, would announce he would run for president, as President Johnson of the same political party says he would no longer run for president that year after the events that had been going on in the Vietnam War. Unfortunately, Robert Kennedy would be another one of the fateful deaths in the 1960s, where in June, just a few months after Dr. King's assassination, he himself would be shot while campaigning in Los Angeles. And usually the story ends right there with Dr. King and his death in 1968. What we want to quickly highlight is a variety of other events that took place in the next following years and into the early 70s as the Vietnam War was taking place. That summer of 68, there was the Summer Olympic Games in Mexico City. Two African-American sprinters, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, are going to use their moment on the podium when the national anthem is being played to use a Black Power moment of putting a fist into the air and having their Puma shoes off to the side. To some Americans, that became a very controversial moment, that the Olympics are not to be a time of political messaging, that you were to be proud and respectful of your country, but they felt best that they should stand up and speak out and in a nonviolent way what they believe should be an issue heard in American society with the power that they have of being athletes. As a result, though, the Olympic Committee would ban them from track and field the rest of their careers. And still to this day, those kind of forms of nonviolent activism have different interpretations by different Americans as to how they see the message being sent. Another Olympic athlete in that same event, Olympics in Mexico City, would be George Foreman, who would win the gold in boxing, and he would use his moment to wave an American flag in celebration. The most famous athlete in America during this time was Muhammad Ali, a world-renowned boxer and regarded with Michael Jordan and Babe Ruth as one of the top greatest athletes in America's history. Originally born as Cassius Clay in Louisville, Kentucky, he would be an Olympic gold medalist, and to some degree, many would regard him as the greatest boxer of all time. He would convert to the Nation of Islam, become friends with Malcolm X, and change his name to Muhammad Ali. At this time, Vietnam War is taking place. There is a draft, and people are being required to now serve in the military. Muhammad Ali, a very animated person who's confident and cocky, unlike any athlete of that time, who would boastfully say, "I'm the best," that I'm the greatest out there, that I can beat and defeat anyone. He is going out there and now, as the people's champ, being asked the question, will you serve in the Vietnam War? Joe Louis in the 1940s was an African-American boxer who decided to represent the country, enlist in the war, and became a symbol to recruit African Americans. The U.S. government is hoping Muhammad Ali will do the same for Vietnam, that he will join the war and he will not necessarily maybe go out into the jungles and fight with a gun, but that he will be a spokesperson for the African American community to encourage them to go and fight. Muhammad Ali, though, has a different approach. He claims he is a conscientious objector. His conscience, his mind, does not believe it is morally right to go and fight in this war. That he doesn't have any issues with the communists or the Viet Cong. He doesn't see why he has to go 10,000 miles to murder and kill people over there when the same thing is happening in this country. He doesn't know why he must defend the freedoms and rights of South Vietnamese people across the planet when he doesn't feel his rights and beliefs are being protected here in the United States. Very good questions that are being brought up. And because of his refusal to now serve in the Vietnam War and as the symbol of American culture and in sports, he is going to be removed from his boxing title, removed from his opportunity to compete anymore, and he now is taken to court and could face multiple years in prison. It makes its way all this way to the Supreme Court. And in the shortest answer, basically there was a little glitch in the terms of his rights being given to him when he was arrested, and therefore the courts determined he does not have to serve in the war. And because it only applies to him specifically, no other African Americans or other people could use the same type of excuse or method or say they don't want to serve and therefore no one had to go to Vietnam. He will return to boxing that next year and compete against George Foreman in a battle to regain his title in Africa, in Kinshasa, Zaire. And in the Rumble in the Jungle, Muhammad Ali, after multiple years of being unemployed and living kind of on the streets and moving around with his family, of giving musicals on Broadway and giving speeches on college campuses, he comes out and ends up winning and becoming the oldest boxer to have the heavyweight title. And he will continue his career throughout much of the 70s, but we will pick up that story another time of what happens later on in his life. Various other athletes and people during this time. Jim Brown, regarded as one of the greatest running backs in professional football. Still to this day, he has more touchdowns and more yards running than any other NFL athlete. Yet even in his time, he only played for 8 seasons. He retired at the age of 29 to go into Hollywood. And in his era, they played 4 fewer football games per year than today's athletes. Yet still, he holds the records. Bill Russell has more NBA championship rings than any other basketball player, 11 titles in 13 years. Wilt Chamberlain has a 100-point basketball game, the highest total still to this day. There's no video evidence of it, but there is a radio recording of his feat. And from the years on into the 1960s and 70s after Dr. King will be a variety of other conflicts and achievements that occur for the African American community and America as a whole. That much of inner city America is in poverty. And one of those groups that's trying to address these issues of poverty and unemployment in their community is going to be the Black Panther Party. Highlighted in Forrest Gump, the Black Panthers are symbolized by the large afro hair, the black jackets, these views of taking the care and defending their communities. If that means they have to protect themselves with guns, they will do so. Also, these ideas of more socialism, of living together, that the money should be dispersed in society. And so America changes and had been changing from maybe that 1920s and 30s image of a Harlem Renaissance, that Harlem in New York City is slowly becoming more and more impoverished, decaying, that the school systems have been defunded, that jobs are going away. And in this community, there is need for help, and they are not seeing it from their government. And as a response, they are seeing the opposite, that they are being mistreated and rights are being taken away. And so Black Panther Party is going to advocate that African Americans should not have to be serving in the war. They should not be in prisons. Every African American should be given a job. Every African American should be given decent homes to live in. That capitalism is what is destroying their communities and providing inequality, that there should be African American history taught in the textbooks, that police should stop arresting and killing African Americans. One of the other positives and lesser known aspects within this self-community and protecting organization of African Americans taking care of one another through education, through housing, through food, is providing meals for children every morning across many cities. Ultimately, the Black Panthers was an organization of several thousand young African Americans in their teens and 20s and 30s, living together in apartment complexes, men and women in various leadership roles. But over time, it leads to conflict and tensions amongst themselves as to who's in charge and what is the best pathway to improve their communities. The government is going to get involved because they're being accused of being the enemy, that police officers are going to be given these nicknames of pigs, that the CIA and the FBI are going to be investigating and wiretapping these communities that are advocating or supposedly promoting violence. There will be house raids about drugs and gun possession. Some of them are accurate, some of them are very false and loose. And so within this context of it all, the Black Panther Party is going to try and say, we want, better livelihoods and a situation for our community, and we want to provide that. And we are going to resist others who are trying to get in our way. In time, many of the members of this party will no longer join. They will leave for various reasons, either because of tensions over methods about how to go about civil rights, or over time. You're in your 20s and it's cool to live with other friends in an apartment, but eventually you want to get married, have kids, get a job. And they, in a sense, some of them grow up and grow out of the party, but they never grow out of the cause and the love of bringing about justice and betterment for their people. Many of the leaders and members of this party are going to be thrown in prison. Some of them will be released because of very false charges and accusations. But what happens is, because you have these court cases and lawyers and attorneys, the party has to pay all this money to deal with the cases. And that money, even though you win the case, you still have to pay the fees for your attorneys and for the courtroom cases and hearings, and pay to have the bail to bring these guys out of prison. And it reduces their funding. Some of them will eventually become exiled. Some of them will run for political offices. Some of the leaders will die in upcoming years, and some of them are still around to this day and are professors in universities. And they highlight a lot of issues like the prison system. In New York State, there will be an Attica prison, which had horrible living conditions for inmates, of poor sanitation, of sewage, of food. It was horrific, and they have a right, and they overtake the prison and take the police officers hostage. But what does the government of New York end up doing is they send in the National Guard, and many of these inmates, who are, again, U.S. citizens, and the police officers, they are going to be killed. And as a result of their deaths, so no of those members who did the killing or no one else is brought to punishment or justice. Poverty will decline over the years since civil rights, as these events and laws and acts have been put in place. Members of the courts are going to be African American. People in Hollywood are going to gain further notoriety and popularity. Diane Carroll became the first female African American to have her own TV show, and a show highlighting a single independent mother with a job, with a college level education, and introducing that to society. From All in the Family, that show we've watched before in class, that you have the Jeffersons, their next door neighbors, and there will be a spin-off in showing the Jeffersons' daughter marrying a white man, and the first interracial couple on national television. Bill Cosby will create a kids' TV show called Fat Albert. And Stan Lee, in the world of comics, they'll create a character called the Black Panther. No direct connection to the Black Panther Party. And in the world of music, a growing group that will gain fame from outside of Chicago are the Jackson 5, of 5 brothers, and the most famous would become the youngest, Michael Jackson. And over time, more and more African Americans are going to use their right to vote and vote other African Americans into government positions. Shirley Chisholm will become the first female African American in Congress and the first woman in America's history to run for president for a major political party. In my own home state, Ernie Chambers would become one of those African Americans to run for the local state government. And till to this day, he is the longest serving member from that legislature.